Each step across Meridian Architectural Restoration's polished marble floor sent a sharp ache through my lower back, the kind of persistent pain that reminded me constantly of the secret growing inside me. 3 months. 3 months of hiding morning sickness behind coffee breaks I couldn't stomach, of loosening belts and wearing flowing blouses to conceal what was becoming impossible to ignore. My hand instinctively moved to my still flat stomach as I approached the reception desk, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. The scent of expensive leather from the client chairs, mixed with the faint smell of blueprint ink and fresh coffee, creating an atmosphere of sophisticated professionalism that I'd once found inspiring. Now, after 6 months of working 12-hour days just to make rent on my tiny studio apartment, it felt suffocating. The classical music playing through hidden speakers couldn't mask the underlying tension that permeated every corner of this place. "Natalie, thank God you're here." Margaret Chen, the office manager, appeared beside me with her usual expression of barely controlled panic. Her perfectly pressed suit and immaculate makeup were a stark contrast to my wrinkled cotton dress and hastily applied concealer, attempting to hide the exhaustion that had become my constant companion. "The Whitmore project presentation is moved up to this afternoon, and Mr. Patterson wants all the historical documentation ready for review in an hour." I nodded, already calculating how many trips to the archive basement it would take to gather everything. The elevator had been broken for 2 weeks, which meant stairs. Lots of stairs. My morning sickness had evolved into all-day queasiness that made the thought of climbing 5 flights with heavy portfolios seem impossible. "Which documents specifically?" I asked, hoping to minimize the physical demands. "Everything. Plans, permits, historical surveys, architectural assessments." Margaret's voice carried that familiar edge of stress that had become the office's default tone since we'd started competing for high-end restoration contracts in Manhattan. This client is apparently very particular about authenticity. Mr. Patterson emphasized that everything must be perfect. The Whitmore project. I'd spent 3 weeks researching the 1890s townhouse on the Upper East Side, documenting every architectural detail, every period-appropriate element that would need to be preserved during renovation. It was exactly the kind of work I'd dreamed of doing when I'd graduated with my master's in historic preservation, but now it felt like another burden in an increasingly impossible situation. My phone buzzed with a text from my landlord. "Rent increase takes effect next month. $400 additional. Sign new lease by Friday or vacate." I stared at the screen, feeling my chest tighten. $400 I didn't have, on top of rent I could barely afford. The math was simple and devastating. "Natalie?" Margaret's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. I'd become expert at lies of omission, at hiding the growing desperation that accompanied each passing day. "Just tired. I'll get the documents ready." The basement archive was a maze of filing cabinets and storage boxes, each containing decades of architectural history. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows across the narrow aisles. As I pulled the heavy Whitmore file from a top shelf, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the cabinet for support, waiting for the world to steady. 3 more hours until lunch break, 3 more hours of pretending everything was normal, while my body reminded me constantly that nothing about my situation was normal. The father of my child didn't even know I existed anymore, having disappeared from my life the morning after what I'd thought was the beginning of something beautiful. Just another successful architect who'd used me and moved on, leaving me with nothing but memories and consequences. I climbed the 5 flights slowly, stopping twice to catch my breath and fighting the nausea that seemed to intensify with physical exertion. Margaret was waiting in the main conference room, her fingernails drumming against the mahogany table in a rhythm that matched my growing anxiety. "The client will be here in 30 minutes, she announced as I entered with the files. "Mr. Patterson wants you to present the historical overview personally. He's specifically requested our most knowledgeable preservation specialist." My heart sank. Presentations meant standing for extended periods, meant being scrutinized, meant performing when all I wanted was to curl up somewhere quiet and rest. But I needed this job, needed the health insurance, needed the steady paycheck, needed some semblance of stability before my secret became impossible to hide. "Of course," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "I'll be ready." The conference room had been transformed into a showcase. Margaret had arranged the documents in chronological order, each portfolio open to display the most impressive architectural drawings. The afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows created dramatic shadows across the plans, highlighting the intricate details I'd spent weeks cataloging. I reviewed my notes one final time, focusing on breathing deeply and maintaining my professional composure. The morning sickness had evolved into afternoon weakness, a persistent fatigue that made even simple tasks feel monumental. But I'd learned to compensate, to push through the physical discomfort with sheer determination. Mr. Patterson arrived precisely at 2:00, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his custom suit radiating the kind of wealth that made our most expensive projects seem modest. Behind him walked a man I'd never seen before, tall and impeccably dressed, with dark hair and an air of authority that seemed to fill the room instantly. "Natalie Brooks, our senior preservation specialist," Mr. Patterson announced with the kind of pride reserved for particularly valuable assets. "She's the architect behind our most successful historical authentications." I stood to shake hands, noting how the stranger's eyes seemed to catalog every detail of my appearance with unsettling intensity. His handshake was firm but brief, his attention moving quickly to the documents spread across the table. There was something about his presence that made the spacious conference room feel smaller, more charged. "Mr. Cross has a particular interest in maintaining historical integrity," Mr. Patterson continued. "He's known for his attention to detail and his willingness to invest in perfect execution." Nathan Cross. The name meant nothing to me, but his obvious wealth and Patterson's deferential tone suggested he was exactly the kind of client our firm courted aggressively. I launched into my presentation, walking through each document, explaining the historical significance of architectural elements, the importance of period-appropriate materials, the delicate balance between preservation and practical modernization. He listened without interruption, his dark eyes following my movements around the table. There was an intensity to his attention that felt different from typical client interest. More personal, more familiar somehow. But I pushed the thought aside, focusing on delivering the comprehensive overview Patterson expected. "The original crown molding in the front parlor," I explained, pointing to a detailed architectural drawing, "was hand-carved by craftsmen from the Lower East Side. We've identified 3 local artisans who still practice the traditional techniques needed for accurate restoration." "Impressive research," he said, his voice carrying a slight rasp that sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. "You clearly understand the importance of authenticity." Our eyes met across the table, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Impossible. I'd never seen this man before, but the way he was looking at me, as if he was solving some complex puzzle, made my pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. "Historical preservation requires absolute commitment to truth," I replied, maintaining professional distance despite the strange energy crackling between us. "Every detail matters when you're protecting something irreplaceable." His smile was slow and knowing. "Truth. Yes, that's exactly what I value most." The rest of the presentation passed in a blur of technical discussions and financial negotiations. Nathan Cross asked detailed questions that demonstrated extensive knowledge of both architecture and business, but his attention kept returning to me in ways that felt increasingly personal rather than professional. When Patterson stepped out to take a phone call, leaving us alone in the conference room, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Nathan moved closer to where I stood beside the architectural drawings, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're very good at what you do," he said quietly, his voice carrying an undertone that made my skin prickle with awareness. "Passionate about preserving things that matter." "It's important work," I managed, suddenly aware of how isolated we were in the glass-walled room, how his presence seemed to dominate the space despite his calm demeanor. "Indeed it is." His eyes moved slowly from my face, down to where my hand had unconsciously moved to rest against my stomach. The gesture lasted only seconds, but in that brief moment, I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see through all my carefully constructed facades. Patterson returned, breaking whatever spell had been building between us, and the meeting concluded with handshakes and promises of follow-up communication. Nathan Cross left with the same commanding presence he'd brought, but not before one final look that left me feeling strangely unsettled. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing files and trying to shake the lingering effects of our encounter. There had been something about him, something that felt significant in ways I couldn't articulate, but clients like Nathan Cross existed in a different world from mine, and brief moments of inexplicable connection meant nothing in the face of my mounting practical concerns. By 6 o'clock, the office had emptied except for the cleaning crew and a few dedicated workaholics burning the midnight oil. I gathered my things slowly, my body aching with the familiar exhaustion that had become my constant companion. The commute home meant an hour on crowded subway cars where the smells of food and perfume would trigger waves of nausea. As I waited for the elevator, Margaret appeared beside me with a manila envelope. "From the Cross meeting," she said with a smile that suggested good news. "Apparently he was very impressed with your presentation. He's specifically requesting you for the project management role." I stared at the envelope, recognizing Patterson's handwriting across the front. Inside would be contract details, timelines, the kind of career opportunity I'd dreamed about before my life became complicated by unplanned pregnancy and financial desperation. "He's offering premium rates," Margaret continued as we stepped into the elevator. "Triple your usual consultation fee, plus bonuses for early completion. Patterson is thrilled. This could be the project that establishes your reputation permanently." The elevator descended slowly, carrying me toward street level and the beginning of my evening commute. I held the envelope carefully, feeling its weight, knowing it represented both opportunity and complication. Working closely with Nathan Cross would mean exposure, scrutiny, extended periods in his presence. And something about our brief interaction had left me feeling more vulnerable than I could afford to be. But the money would solve my immediate problems. The insurance would cover prenatal care. The professional recognition could secure my future in ways that seemed impossible just hours earlier. As the elevator doors opened and I stepped into the bustling lobby, I made my decision. I would take the project. I would work with Nathan Cross. I would be professional, competent, and carefully invisible in all the ways that mattered, because sometimes survival required accepting opportunities that felt dangerous, and I was running out of safe choices. The subway ride home was exactly as miserable as predicted, but I sat with my hand protectively over my stomach, and my mind focused on the future. Tomorrow I would call Nathan Cross's office. Tomorrow I would begin the project that might save everything. Tonight, I would allow myself to hope that things were finally starting to improve. The morning after accepting the Whitmore project, I arrived at the townhouse on East 73rd Street to find Nathan Cross already there, studying the building's facade with the same intense focus he'd brought to our conference room meeting. The sight of him in casual dress, dark jeans and a fitted black sweater that emphasized his lean build, sent an unexpected flutter through my chest that I immediately tried to suppress. "You're early," he said, without turning around, somehow aware of my presence despite my quiet approach. "I appreciate punctuality." "I wanted to assess the site conditions before our team meeting," I replied, pulling out my tablet and camera to begin documenting. Morning light reveals different architectural details than afternoon shadows. He turned then, and I was struck again by the unsettling intensity of his attention. In daylight, his features were sharper, more defined. There was something almost predatory about the way he watched me, as if he was constantly evaluating, calculating. Always thorough. I noticed that about you yesterday. The comment felt weighted with meaning I couldn't decipher. I focused on the building instead, noting the condition of the limestone facade, the intricate ironwork of the balconies, the way decades of weather had affected the original construction materials. This was safer ground, technical, professional, devoid of the strange undercurrents that seemed to follow our interactions. The cornice work is more deteriorated than the initial assessment indicated, I observed, photographing areas where the decorative stonework had begun to crumble. We'll need specialist mason consultation before proceeding with facade restoration. Cost isn't a concern, he said simply. Quality is. I want this building restored to exactly what it was in 1895, regardless of expense. I nodded, making notes about the expanded scope of work. Clients with unlimited budgets were rare in architectural restoration, but they came with their own complications. Perfectionist expectations, frequent changes, intensive oversight. Still, the financial security this project represented made any challenges worthwhile. I'll need access to all interior spaces for comprehensive assessment, I continued. Structural elements, mechanical systems, original architectural details that might be hidden behind later renovations. Of course, I'll arrange for keys and security codes. He moved closer as I worked, ostensibly to observe my documentation process, but his proximity was distracting in ways that had nothing to do with professional considerations. I assume you'll be conducting the assessment personally? Yes. Historical preservation requires hands-on evaluation that can't be delegated. I stepped sideways, maintaining professional distance while continuing to photograph. The initial survey will take approximately 2 weeks, followed by detailed restoration planning. My phone buzzed with a text from my doctor's office, reminding me about my upcoming appointment. I glanced at the screen automatically, then quickly tucked the phone away when I realized Nathan had been watching. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere between us. "Health appointment?" he asked casually. Too casually. "Routine checkup," I replied, uncomfortable with his apparent observation of my personal communications. Nothing that will interfere with the project timeline. The rest of our site meeting proceeded normally, discussions of renovation phases, material sourcing, timeline coordination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan was studying me as much as he was listening to my professional recommendations. Every gesture, every expression seemed to register with him in ways that felt invasive. Over the following week, our interactions intensified. He appeared at the townhouse daily, sometimes with legitimate questions about restoration decisions, sometimes seemingly just to observe my work. His presence was simultaneously reassuring and unsettling. He clearly cared deeply about the project's success, but his attention felt personal in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. "You're very dedicated," he commented one afternoon as I cataloged original hardware in the front parlor. "Most consultants would delegate this level of detail work. Most consultants don't understand that authenticity lives in the details," I replied, carefully removing a period door handle for cleaning and assessment. "These pieces tell the story of how people actually lived in this space. And stories matter to you." It wasn't a question. I looked up from my work to find him watching me with that familiar intensity. Historical narratives matter, yes. Understanding context helps preserve meaning along with physical structures. What about personal stories? Do those matter too? The question felt loaded, dangerous. I returned my attention to the hardware, using the physical task to avoid meeting his eyes. "I'm here to preserve architectural history, Mr. Cross. Personal narratives aren't part of my professional scope." "Nathan," he corrected quietly, "and I think you'd be surprised how much personal and professional narratives can overlap." That evening, I discovered he'd been more thorough in his background research than typical client due diligence would require. Margaret mentioned during our weekly check-in that Nathan's assistant had requested copies of my academic transcripts, professional certifications, and previous project portfolios. Nothing improper, but unusually comprehensive for a restoration project. He's very invested in this townhouse, Margaret explained when I expressed concern about the extensive documentation requests. Apparently it has significant personal meaning, family history, or something similar. I accepted the explanation because I needed to, but uneasiness continued growing. Nathan's questions during our daily interactions were becoming increasingly personal, disguised as professional interest, but probing into areas that had nothing to do with architectural restoration. The breakthrough came during my second week of interior assessment. I was photographing original crown molding in the master bedroom when my tablet slipped from my increasingly unsteady hands. Morning sickness had evolved into persistent fatigue and occasional dizzy spells that made detailed work increasingly challenging. Nathan appeared instantly, retrieving the tablet before I could react. His reflexes were too quick, his arrival too convenient. He'd been watching, waiting, anticipating my physical struggles with a level of attention that went far beyond professional interest. "You should sit," he said, guiding me toward a paint-covered chair before I could protest. "You look pale." "I'm fine, just tired from the workload." But even as I spoke, another wave of dizziness made the room tilt slightly. I gripped the chair arms, fighting to maintain composure while my body betrayed me with symptoms I could no longer easily hide. Nathan knelt beside the chair, his dark eyes studying my face with an expression that shifted from concern to something more calculating. "How far along are you?" The question hit like a physical blow. I stared at him, temporarily speechless, realizing that my carefully maintained facade had crumbled without my awareness. "I don't know what you mean. 3 months? 4? His voice was gentle but implacable. "You've been fighting morning sickness for weeks, wearing progressively looser clothing, avoiding coffee and wine during our business dinners. The signs are subtle but consistent." My hands moved instinctively to my stomach, a gesture that confirmed what he'd already concluded. "My personal life isn't your concern, isn't it?" He stood, moving to the bedroom window that overlooked the building's rear courtyard. "You're working for me, Natalie. Your well-being directly affects project success, and pregnant women shouldn't be exposed to renovation dust and chemical fumes without proper protection." The practical concern seemed reasonable, but his tone suggested deeper interest. I forced myself to stand, needing to reclaim some measure of control over a conversation that felt increasingly dangerous. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own health and safety." I retrieved my tablet and camera, preparing to continue work despite my shaky equilibrium. The project timeline doesn't allow for reduced productivity. The timeline is flexible. Nathan moved between me and the bedroom door, not blocking my exit but making clear that the conversation wasn't finished. "Your health isn't." Something in his tone made me look up sharply. The careful politeness he'd maintained throughout our professional relationship had slipped, revealing something harder underneath. Not threatening, exactly, but definitely authoritative in ways that had nothing to do with client privilege. "I need to finish documenting this room," I said carefully, testing whether he would actually prevent me from continuing my work. He stepped aside immediately, but his expression remained thoughtful. "Of course, but we should discuss adjusted working conditions, shorter days, better ventilation, reduced physical demands." The suggestions were reasonable, considerate even, but they also represented a level of involvement in my personal circumstances that crossed professional boundaries. I nodded agreement because arguing seemed pointless, but my discomfort continued growing. That evening, I researched Nathan Cross more thoroughly than I had before accepting the project. What I found was simultaneously reassuring and alarming. Successful real estate developer with an impeccable public reputation. generous charitable donations, particularly to organizations supporting women and children. No criminal record, no scandal, no obvious red flags. But successful men with spotless public images sometimes had the most to hide, and Nathan's interest in my personal circumstances felt increasingly intrusive rather than considerate. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Nathan arrived at the townhouse with a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, elegant, expensively dressed, with the kind of refined beauty that suggested both good genetics and excellent maintenance. My fiancée, Victoria Wellington, Nathan introduced her with casual pride. She's interested in the restoration process. Victoria's smile was polite, but cool as she shook my hand. Her grip was firm, her attention sharp, and something in her expression suggested she'd heard about me in contexts that went beyond professional consultation. Nathan speaks very highly of your expertise, she said with the kind of practiced graciousness that barely concealed deeper assessment. He's quite impressed with your attention to detail. The subtext felt weighted with meaning I couldn't fully interpret. I responded with appropriate professional courtesy while studying the dynamic between them. Nathan's body language suggested possession rather than partnership. His hand on Victoria's back was protective but controlling, his attention divided between her and continued observation of my reactions. Victoria has excellent taste in historical design, Nathan continued. I value her input on aesthetic decisions. This explained nothing about why she was here, why Nathan had chosen today to introduce his fiancée, why both of them were watching me with such focused attention. But I smiled and nodded and played my role as contracted architectural consultant. The morning proceeded with discussions of restoration priorities, material selections, timeline adjustments. Victoria asked intelligent questions that demonstrated genuine knowledge of period architecture, but her interest seemed as much about studying me as understanding the renovation process. During a brief moment when Nathan stepped away to take a phone call, Victoria moved closer to where I was examining original fireplace tiles. You're exactly as he described, she said quietly, her tone devoid of the earlier artificial warmth. I'm sorry? Dedicated, passionate about your work, completely absorbed in historical details. Her smile was sharp, predatory. Nathan finds that very appealing in his professional relationships. The comment felt like a warning disguised as small talk. I focused on the tile work, avoiding eye contact that might invite further uncomfortable conversation. I'm here to do a job, I replied carefully, nothing more. Of course. Victoria's laugh was light, musical, completely at odds with the tension radiating from her posture. Nathan just becomes very invested in his projects, sometimes more invested than strictly necessary. Nathan returned before I could respond, ending the private conversation but not the implications hanging in the air between us. The rest of their visit passed without incident, but I was left with the unmistakable impression that Victoria's presence had been intended as some kind of message. That afternoon, alone in the townhouse, I discovered something that made my growing uneasiness crystallize into genuine alarm. While photographing architectural details in the building's basement utility room, I found evidence of recent electronic installation, wiring that was too new, too sophisticated for standard security or lighting systems, surveillance equipment. Nathan had been monitoring the building, and by extension, monitoring me. I completed my documentation with forced calm, but my hands were trembling by the time I packed my equipment. Every conversation, every private moment I'd spent working in the townhouse had potentially been observed. The thought made my skin crawl with violation and fear. Outside, I called Margaret from my cell phone, keeping my voice steady as I reported a family emergency that would require me to miss the next day's site visit. I needed time to think, to decide how to handle a situation that had clearly become much more complicated than architectural restoration. That night, I sat in my small apartment reviewing every interaction I'd had with Nathan Cross, searching for signs I'd missed, clues I'd overlooked. His interest had never been purely professional. The project had been an elaborate setup, designed to bring me into his orbit, to give him access to my life in ways that seemed legitimate, but were actually invasive. But why? What did Nathan Cross want from me that required such elaborate manipulation? And how could I extract myself from a situation that felt increasingly like a carefully constructed trap? My hand moved to my stomach, a gesture that had become automatic over the past weeks. Whatever Nathan's intentions, I had more than myself to protect now. The baby growing inside me deserved a mother who could make smart decisions, who could recognize danger and respond appropriately. Tomorrow I would call Patterson's office and request reassignment to a different project. I would recommend a colleague for the Whitmore townhouse restoration. I would create professional distance before Nathan Cross's interest evolved into something I couldn't handle. But even as I made these plans, I suspected Nathan wouldn't accept my withdrawal easily. Men like him, wealthy, powerful, accustomed to getting what they wanted, didn't respond well to being denied. And I had the uncomfortable feeling that I'd already become something he very much wanted. I spent the night crafting what I believed was a professionally appropriate withdrawal from the Whitmore project, citing increased workload and scheduling conflicts that would prevent me from giving Nathan's restoration the attention it deserved. By morning, I'd convinced myself that a clean, respectful transition would end my involvement with Nathan Cross permanently. The email was sent at 7 a.m. Nathan's response arrived at 7:15. "We need to discuss this in person. I'll be at the townhouse at 9. Not a request, not a suggestion. A statement of fact delivered with the kind of quiet authority that suggested refusal wasn't an option. I stared at my phone screen, recognizing that my attempt to create distance had instead triggered exactly the kind of attention I'd hoped to avoid. I arrived at the townhouse at 8:50, hoping to maintain some control over our conversation by being there first. Nathan was already waiting, sitting casually on the front steps with 2 coffee cups and an expression that suggested he'd anticipated my early arrival. "Decaf," he said, offering me one of the cups as I approached. "With just enough cream to take the edge off. You mentioned preferring it that way during our first business lunch." The fact that he'd remembered such a minor detail felt both thoughtful and unsettling. I accepted the coffee because refusing seemed petty, but I didn't drink it. The morning sickness that had plagued me for weeks made even the smell of coffee problematic. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, maintaining professional distance as we entered the building. "I hope you understand that my decision isn't personal. The project timeline simply doesn't align with my current commitments. Your current commitments." Nathan closed the door behind us, the sound echoing in the empty foyer. "You mean your pregnancy?" The direct statement hit harder than I'd expected. During our previous interactions, he'd alluded to his awareness of my condition without explicitly acknowledging it. This blunt recognition felt like crossing a line we hadn't previously approached. "My personal circumstances aren't relevant to this discussion," I replied, but my voice lacked the conviction I'd intended to project. "Aren't they?" Nathan moved to the window that overlooked the building's rear courtyard, his posture relaxed but somehow predatory. "Single woman, unexpected pregnancy, mounting financial pressures. This project represents significant income and professional advancement. Withdrawing now doesn't make rational sense." The assessment was accurate and infuriating. "You don't know anything about my financial situation." "Don't I?" He turned from the window, fixing me with that familiar, intense stare. "Rent increase notice from your landlord. Medical bills that aren't fully covered by your current insurance plan. Student loan payments that consume nearly 30% of your monthly income. Should I continue?" The bottom dropped out of my stomach. Nathan had been investigating my personal finances, accessing information that no legitimate client should possess. "How do you know about my rent situation?" "The same way I know you've been checking apartment listings in Queens, looking for cheaper alternatives. The same way I know you've been researching maternity coverage through the state insurance exchange." His voice remained calm, conversational, as if discussing weather rather than revealing the extent of his intrusion into my private life. I set the coffee cup down carefully, fighting the urge to throw it. "You've been spying on me." "I've been paying attention. There's a difference." Nathan approached slowly, his movement casual but purposeful. "Natalie, you're clearly struggling. Financially, emotionally, physically. This project offers solutions to your immediate problems. Walking away makes no sense. Unless working with you is what's causing the problems." I backed toward the front door, suddenly eager to escape the confined space where his presence felt overwhelming. "Is it?" He stopped moving, allowing me the distance I sought, but maintaining visual contact that felt inescapable. "Has our professional relationship been inappropriate in any way? Have I made you uncomfortable?" The questions were perfectly reasonable, his tone carefully neutral. On the surface, Nathan had been nothing but professional, courteous, respectful, focused on project details. But something underneath his polished demeanor felt dangerous in ways I couldn't articulate. "You know things about my personal life that you shouldn't know," I said, grateful my voice remained steady despite my growing panic. "That's inappropriate, regardless of how you acquired the information. Information that's publicly available through standard background checks and credit reports." Nathan's expression suggested genuine confusion at my reaction. "Natalie, I'm a businessman. Due diligence is standard practice when forming professional relationships. Due diligence doesn't include medical records and private financial information." "Medical records?" His eyebrows lifted slightly. "I haven't accessed any medical records. I noticed physical symptoms that suggested pregnancy and drew logical conclusions. As for financial information, credit checks are routine for any contractor working on significant projects." The explanation sounded reasonable when presented calmly, professionally. But my instincts screamed warnings that transcended rational analysis. Nathan Cross knew too much, paid too much attention, maintained too much control over our interactions. "Regardless," I said, reaching for the door handle, "I'm withdrawing from the project. I'll recommend qualified colleagues who can complete the restoration to your specifications." "Natalie." His voice stopped me without him moving from his position across the room. "Look at me." Against my better judgment, I turned to meet his eyes. What I saw there wasn't anger or frustration at being denied something he wanted. Instead, there was something that looked almost like concern, combined with a patience that suggested he was willing to wait as long as necessary for me to reach conclusions he'd already drawn. "I know you're scared," he said quietly. "Unexpected pregnancy, uncertain future, financial pressure mounting daily. It's natural to interpret professional interest as something more threatening when you're feeling vulnerable. The analysis was accurate enough to be infuriating. I'm not interpreting anything. I'm responding to behavior that crosses professional boundaries." "Such as?" The challenge was delivered mildly, but it forced me to articulate specific objections that suddenly seemed less concrete than they'd felt in the abstract. Nathan had never touched me inappropriately, never made sexual comments, never explicitly crossed lines that would constitute harassment. The background investigation went beyond standard business practices, I said finally. "Did it?" "I investigated your professional qualifications, your educational background, your previous project experience. The financial assessment was limited to publicly available credit information. Nothing I discovered wasn't accessible through standard business channels." He was right, and we both knew it. My accusations were based on instinct rather than evidence, on feelings rather than facts. But the instincts were strong enough to override logical analysis. "I'm still withdrawing from the project," I said, turning back toward the door. "The baby is mine." The words stopped me so completely that for a moment I forgot to breathe. I turned slowly, certain I'd misheard, but Nathan's expression confirmed that he'd said exactly what I thought he'd said. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Is it?" Nathan moved closer, his earlier careful distance abandoned. 4 months ago, the Meridian Society fundraiser at the Metropolitan Museum. You were there with colleagues from Patterson's firm, wearing a blue dress that matched your eyes. We talked about historical preservation, about the importance of protecting beautiful things from damage. Memory crashed over me like a physical blow. The fundraiser, the mysterious, charming man who'd appeared beside me during the cocktail reception. Intelligent conversation that had evolved into something more intimate over shared wine and mutual attraction. The hotel room afterward, where passionate connection had seemed like the beginning of something significant rather than a meaningless encounter. You disappeared, I said, my voice barely audible. The next morning you were gone. I had business to attend to, but I never forgot you. Nathan was close enough now that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the expensive cologne that had haunted my dreams for weeks after our encounter. I never stopped thinking about you. 4 months of thinking about me, but you never called, never reached out. Anger was replacing shock, burning through the confusion to settle into something cleaner and more manageable. Until now, when it's convenient for you. Convenient? Nathan's laugh was sharp, humorless. Natalie, I've spent 4 months having you investigated by private detectives. I've purchased this building specifically because your firm has expertise in historical renovation. I've arranged this entire project to bring you back into my life. Nothing about this has been convenient. The confession should have been romantic. A wealthy, powerful man going to elaborate lengths to reconnect with a woman who'd captured his imagination. Instead, it felt like the revelation of a carefully orchestrated trap. You manipulated me, I said, my voice growing stronger as anger overcame fear. You created a false professional relationship to gain access to my life. I created an opportunity for us to reconnect without the complications of personal history. Nathan's tone remained calm despite the growing tension between us. You needed work. I needed expertise. The project served both our interests. My interests don't include being deceived and manipulated. Your interests include financial security, professional advancement, and medical care for our child. The possessive pronoun landed like a physical blow, all of which this project provides. Our child? I backed away from him, needing distance to process what he was suggesting. This baby isn't ours anything. This baby is mine. Biology disagrees with you. Nathan followed my retreat, maintaining the closing distance between us. I'm the father, which means I have rights and responsibilities that extend beyond your personal preferences. The legal implications of his statement hit me like cold water. Nathan Cross had resources I couldn't imagine, influence I couldn't match. And now he was asserting parental rights to a child I'd planned to raise alone. You don't know for certain that you're the father, I said, grasping for any argument that might provide escape from the trap I suddenly realized I'd been walking into for weeks. Don't I? Nathan pulled out his phone, scrolling to what appeared to be a medical document. Paternity testing through maternal blood sampling, completely safe for the developing fetus, completely accurate for determining biological parentage. I had it done 3 weeks ago. That's impossible. You'd need my blood sample, which I obtained from the coffee cup you left at the townhouse during your first site visit. DNA analysis confirmed what I already suspected. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Nathan had been planning this confrontation for weeks, gathering evidence, building a case, constructing an argument I couldn't refute. Every coffee cup, every casual gesture, every moment of apparent courtesy had been calculated manipulation. That's illegal, I managed, though my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Is it? You left the cup behind voluntarily. I simply had it tested through private medical services that don't require consent for paternity determination. Nathan's expression remained calm, as if discussing weather rather than revealing the extent of his deception. The results are legally admissible should formal custody proceedings become necessary. Custody proceedings. The words echoed in my mind like a death knell. Nathan wasn't just claiming paternity. He was threatening legal action to gain control over my child. "What do you want?" I asked, abandoning any pretense of maintaining professional composure. "I want what any father wants. A relationship with my child. A role in important decisions, financial responsibility, and emotional investment." Nathan moved to the fireplace, his posture relaxed despite the intensity of our conversation. "I want us to discuss how to move forward together." Together? The word felt foreign, impossible. "Nathan, we barely know each other. One night 4 months ago doesn't constitute a relationship. Doesn't it? We connected that night, Natalie. Intellectually, emotionally, physically. The chemistry between us was undeniable." His eyes met mine across the room, and I felt an unwelcome flutter of recognition. That connection produced our child. It deserves exploration. I forced myself to remember the morning after our encounter, waking alone in the hotel room with only a note thanking me for a lovely evening. The casual dismissal had stung more than I'd wanted to admit, making me feel used and discarded. "You left," I said, letting the hurt I'd suppressed for months color my voice. "You treated me like a one-night stand and disappeared from my life. I left because staying would have complicated things before I was ready to handle them properly." Nathan's tone suggested genuine regret. "My business interests require careful management of personal relationships. I needed time to arrange circumstances that would allow us to reconnect appropriately." Appropriately. Anger flared again, burning through my confusion. "You mean you needed time to investigate me, manipulate me, and construct an elaborate deception?" "I needed time to understand what you meant to me and how to protect what we'd created together." Nathan approached slowly, his movement non-threatening but purposeful. "Natalie, I'm offering you security, partnership, and support. Everything you need to raise our child successfully." "I don't need you to raise my child. Our child. And yes, you do." Nathan's voice hardened slightly, revealing steel beneath his careful courtesy. "Medical care, education, safety, opportunity. I can provide things you can't. The question is whether you'll accept help willingly or force me to pursue legal remedies." The threat was delivered politely, almost gently, but it was unmistakably a threat. Nathan had resources to wage custody battles I couldn't afford to fight. He had influence to shape legal proceedings in his favor. He had evidence of paternity that would support his claims. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, recognizing that I had no choice but to negotiate from a position of profound weakness. "Partnership. You continue working on the townhouse renovation, but as more than a contractor. As my partner in creating a home where we can raise our child together." Nathan's smile was warm, seemingly genuine. "I'm proposing that we explore whether what we felt 4 months ago can develop into something more substantial. And if it can't, if we're incompatible as partners, then we'll find other arrangements that serve our child's best interests." The implication was clear. If I couldn't be convinced to cooperate willingly, Nathan would pursue alternatives that might not consider my interests at all. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the charming man I'd met at the fundraiser with the calculating manipulator standing before me. Both versions seemed genuine, which made him more dangerous rather than less. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Of course, but not too much time." Nathan moved to the window, gazing out at the courtyard as if our conversation had been merely casual discussion rather than life-altering negotiation. The building's renovation timeline requires decisions about living arrangements within the next 2 weeks. Living arrangements? The townhouse will need to be furnished, decorated, made ready for occupancy. If we're going to be living here together, Your input on those decisions is essential." The assumption embedded in his statement took my breath away. Nathan wasn't just proposing partnership. He was assuming cohabitation, shared domestic space, a level of intimacy that went far beyond co-parenting arrangements. "I never agreed to live with you," I said carefully. "Haven't you? You're carrying my child, Natalie. In 6 months, that child will need a home, stability, 2 parents who can provide love and security." Nathan turned from the window, his expression serious but not unkind. "I'm offering you a chance to help create that environment. And if I refuse, then I'll create it without your input and pursue custody arrangements that ensure our child has access to proper care and opportunity." The threat was delivered matter-of-factly, as if discussing business logistics rather than threatening to separate a mother from her child. I felt trapped, cornered by circumstances I'd never anticipated, and choices I'd never wanted to make. Nathan Cross had appeared in my life like a savior, offering financial security and professional opportunity. Now he was revealing himself as something far more complex and potentially dangerous. 2 weeks, he said, approaching close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Think about what's best for our child, Natalie. Think about what kind of future you want to provide." He left then, closing the door quietly behind him, leaving me alone in the empty townhouse with the echoes of his ultimatum. I sank into one of the paint-covered chairs, my hands automatically moving to protect my stomach, and tried to process what had just happened to my life. Nathan Cross wasn't just the father of my child. He was a man who got what he wanted through careful planning, strategic manipulation, and overwhelming resources. He wanted me, wanted our child, wanted a family constructed according to his specifications, and I was running out of options to deny him. 3 days after Nathan's ultimatum, I sat in my doctor's office staring at the ultrasound screen, watching the tiny form that would forever connect me to a man I barely knew, but who seemed to know everything about me. The baby's heartbeat filled the room with rhythmic proof that my choices would affect more than just my own future. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Martinez said, with the kind of warm professionalism that had initially drawn me to her practice. "Baby's measuring right on schedule for 16 weeks. Have you given any thought to prenatal classes? It's good to start planning early." I nodded automatically, but my mind was elsewhere. Nathan had been texting regularly since our confrontation, not pressuring, just maintaining contact. Weather updates, pregnancy nutrition articles, architectural details about the townhouse renovation. Each message felt like a gentle reminder that he was still there, still waiting for my decision. "Are you planning to have a support person for delivery?" Dr. Martinez continued, making notes in my chart. "Partner, family member, close friend?" The question highlighted how alone I was in this situation. My parents lived across the country and still believed I was successfully building my career in New York. My friends were mostly work colleagues who knew nothing about my pregnancy or my growing complications with Nathan Cross. "I'm still working that out," I said carefully. "Well, you have time, but it's good to start thinking about your support system now." Dr. Martinez's expression grew slightly concerned. "Natalie, are you eating regularly? You've lost 2 pounds since your last visit, which isn't ideal at this stage." I had been eating irregularly, stress and morning sickness combining to make food feel like another burden rather than nourishment. The financial pressure hadn't eased despite Nathan's project payments. The increased rent, mounting medical bills, and general pregnancy expenses were consuming every dollar I earned. "I'm having some appetite issues," I admitted. "That's normal, but we need to make sure you're getting adequate nutrition. Are you taking the prenatal vitamins I prescribed?" The vitamins cost $60 a month and weren't covered by my insurance. I'd been taking them sporadically, rationing the pills to make the bottle last longer. Most of the time. Dr. Chiu. Martinez's expression suggested she understood more than I was saying. "Natalie, if cost is an issue, there are programs that can help. Nutrition assistance, medication support, even help with medical expenses. The offer was kind, but it highlighted exactly how precarious my situation had become. I was one medical emergency away from financial disaster, one complication away from losing the stability I'd worked so hard to build. Walking home from the appointment, I found myself unconsciously taking the route that passed the Whitmore townhouse. Nathan's renovation had progressed rapidly in my absence, workers coming and going, delivery trucks bringing materials, the kind of expensive efficiency that unlimited budgets could purchase. Nathan was there, standing on the front steps talking to a man in an expensive suit. When he saw me, he said something to his companion that sent the man walking quickly toward a waiting car. Then Nathan approached me with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he'd been expecting this encounter. "How did the appointment go?" he asked, falling into step beside me as if we'd planned to walk together. I stopped moving, unsettled by his knowledge of my medical schedule. "How do you know I had an appointment?" "You mentioned needing to adjust our meeting time because of a doctor's visit." Nathan's tone was patient, as if explaining something obvious to a child. I assumed it was pregnancy-related. Had I mentioned that? The past few days felt like a blur of stress and decision-making that had left me uncertain about what I'd said to whom. "The baby's fine," I said carefully. "I'm glad. And you? How are you managing?" The question felt loaded with meaning beyond simple courtesy. Nathan was studying my face with the same intensity he'd brought to our previous interactions, cataloging details I couldn't hide. "I'm fine too. Are you? You look tired. Thinner than when we first met." Nathan moved closer, his proximity both comforting and unsettling. "Natalie, you don't have to struggle through this alone." "I'm not struggling." "Aren't you?" Nathan pulled out his phone, scrolling to what appeared to be a financial document. "Your rent increase went into effect yesterday. Your insurance premium increased by 40% this month. Your grocery expenses have decreased by 30% over the past 2 weeks. The accuracy of his information sent a chill down my spine. How could you possibly know that? The same way I know you've been looking at studio apartments in neighborhoods with questionable safety ratings. The same way I know you've been rationing prenatal vitamins and skipping meals. Nathan's voice remained calm, but his eyes showed something that might have been genuine concern. "Natalie, you're not taking care of yourself properly. That's not your business. Isn't it? You're carrying my child. Your health directly affects the baby's development." Nathan moved closer, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "I'm offering solutions to your problems. Your solutions come with strings attached. Partnership comes with mutual obligations. That's different from strings." Nathan gestured toward the townhouse, where workers were installing what appeared to be expensive security systems. "I'm renovating that building as a home for our family. Your family. Our child will grow up with every advantage, every opportunity, every protection I can provide." The word protection carried undertones that made me uneasy. Protection from what? From financial insecurity, from unsafe living conditions, from the kind of stress that affects maternal health and fetal development. Nathan's expression grew serious. From being raised by a single mother who's struggling to survive rather than thriving enough to nurture. The assessment stung because it was accurate. I was struggling, barely managing to maintain the facade of competence while my world fell apart around me. Nathan was offering rescue, but rescue that came with complete surrender of autonomy. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, recognizing that I was moving toward capitulation but needing to understand the terms. "Move into the townhouse. Continue overseeing the renovation, but as a partner rather than a contractor. Let me provide the financial security you need to focus on your health and our child's development." Nathan's tone was reasonable, almost gentle. "Let me take care of you. And in exchange? We explore whether what we felt 4 months ago can develop into something sustainable. We build a family together." Nathan paused, studying my expression. We give our child the stable, loving home every child deserves. The offer was seductive in its simplicity. Financial pressure would disappear. Medical care would be comprehensive. The baby would grow up with every advantage wealth could provide. All I had to do was surrender my independence to a man who'd already proven capable of elaborate manipulation. I need to see the living arrangements, I said finally, before I make any decisions. Nathan's smile was immediate and genuine. Of course, the residential floors are nearly finished. I think you'll find them comfortable. The townhouse's upper floors had been transformed into something that belonged in architectural magazines rather than real life. The master bedroom was spacious and elegant, with windows overlooking a private garden and enough space for a sitting area and home office. The nursery was already partially decorated, painted in soft yellows and greens that would work for either gender. There's a guest suite on the 3rd floor if you prefer separate sleeping arrangements initially, Nathan said, noting my examination of the master bedroom's large bed. I want you to be comfortable. The apartment was beautiful, luxurious, far beyond anything I could ever afford independently. But it was also clearly designed to his specifications, decorated according to his taste, structured around his lifestyle. Where would you sleep? I asked. Wherever you're most comfortable with me sleeping. Nathan's tone was carefully neutral. Natalie, I'm not going to pressure you into physical intimacy you're not ready for. The goal is partnership, not conquest. The distinction felt important, though I wasn't sure I understood the difference. Nathan wanted something from me. My presence, my cooperation, my participation in his vision of family. But he was willing to be patient about the physical aspects of that vision. The renovation will be finished in 6 weeks, he continued. That gives us time to adjust to living together before the baby arrives. Time to establish routines, build trust, create the kind of stable environment that benefits everyone. I walked through the apartment again, trying to imagine myself living here, sharing domestic space with Nathan Cross. The financial relief would be immediate and comprehensive. The stress that had been consuming me for months would disappear overnight. What about my independence? I asked. My career, my autonomy, my right to make my own decisions? Your career continues, enhanced by partnership with someone who values your expertise. Your autonomy remains intact within the context of mutual consideration for our child's welfare. Nathan moved to the window that overlooked the garden. Natalie, I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to create conditions where you can thrive. And if I want to leave? If this arrangement doesn't work? Then we'll find alternatives that serve our child's best interests. The response was the same he'd given before, diplomatic but evasive about what those alternatives might entail. I knew I was being offered a deal that heavily favored Nathan's interests over my own. But I also knew that my current situation was unsustainable, that the stress and financial pressure were affecting my health and potentially my pregnancy. I need 1 more day to think about it, I said. Of course. Nathan moved toward the door, then paused. Natalie, I want you to know that regardless of what you decide about our living arrangements, I intend to be involved in our child's life. This offer is about making that involvement beneficial for everyone, rather than adversarial. The underlying threat was clear, even wrapped in considerate language. Nathan would be part of this situation whether I cooperated or not. The question was whether I would participate willingly in arrangements that offered me some comfort and security, or force him to pursue alternatives that prioritized his rights over my preferences. That night, I sat in my cramped studio apartment calculating the mathematics of survival. Rent, utilities, food, medical expenses, maternity clothes, baby supplies. The numbers added up to impossibility. I was already behind on several bills, already rationing necessities, already compromising my health through stress and inadequate nutrition. Nathan's offer would solve every practical problem while creating new emotional and psychological complications. But the baby growing inside me deserved better than a mother who was constantly stressed about money. constantly worried about basic necessities. I called Nathan at 8 o'clock the next morning. "I'll move in this weekend," I said without preamble. "But I want separate bedrooms until after the baby is born. And I want written agreements about financial arrangements and future custody considerations." "Of course," Nathan replied, his satisfaction evident even over the phone. "I'll have my attorney draft something that protects both our interests." "And Nathan, this is about the baby, not about us." "I'm not agreeing to be your girlfriend or partner in anything except co-parenting." "Understood," he said. "Although I hope you'll keep an open mind about possibilities." I hung up knowing I'd just made a decision that would change everything about my life. Nathan Cross had gotten what he wanted through patience, pressure, and the offer of solutions to problems he'd helped create. I was moving into his space, accepting his support, becoming dependent on his resources. But I was also ensuring that my child would grow up with advantages I could never provide alone. And perhaps, in a situation where I had little power, that was the best choice available. Moving into Nathan's townhouse felt like stepping into an alternate reality where every detail of daily life had been anticipated and arranged to perfection. My belongings, what few possessions I'd accumulated in my small studio, looked insignificant in the spacious guest suite Nathan had prepared for me. Designer furniture, carefully curated artwork, and amenities I'd never experienced created an environment that was beautiful, but fundamentally foreign. "Mrs. Chen will handle household management," Nathan explained as he showed me through the kitchen, which was equipped with professional-grade appliances I had no idea how to operate. "Meals, cleaning, laundry, whatever you need. I want you to focus on your health and the baby." Mrs. Chen was a pleasant woman in her 50s who spoke with a slight accent and moved through the house with quiet efficiency. She smiled warmly when Nathan introduced us, but I caught her studying me with the kind of assessment that suggested she'd been briefed about my situation. "Mr. Cross mentioned you're experiencing morning sickness," she said kindly. "I've prepared some ginger tea and crackers that might help settle your stomach." The consideration was thoughtful, but it highlighted how thoroughly Nathan had discussed my personal circumstances with his household staff. Every aspect of my condition, my needs, my routines, had apparently been analyzed and accommodated before my arrival. "Thank you," I said, accepting the tea despite my discomfort, with the level of attention focused on my pregnancy symptoms. "That's very kind. Mrs. Chen raised 4 children of her own," Nathan added. "She's invaluable for understanding what pregnant women need." The comment suggested long-term planning that went beyond temporary accommodation. Nathan wasn't just housing me during my pregnancy. He was assembling a support system designed to facilitate child rearing under his roof. That first week passed in a careful dance of cohabitation that felt more like an extended job interview than domestic partnership. Nathan was unfailingly courteous, respectful of my privacy, attentive to my comfort without being intrusive. He left for business meetings each morning and returned in the evenings with updates about his day and genuine interest in mine. "How was your appointment with the obstetrician?" he asked one evening as we shared dinner in the elegant dining room. Mrs. Chen had prepared something that smelled wonderful, but which my sensitive stomach could barely tolerate. "Fine. Everything's progressing normally." I pushed food around my plate, trying to eat enough to avoid appearing ungrateful while fighting persistent nausea. "And the nutrition counseling? Was that helpful?" I looked up sharply. "How do you know about nutrition counseling?" "You mentioned being concerned about weight loss. I assumed your doctor would address that." Nathan's expression was innocent, but I was beginning to recognize that he knew more about my activities than casual conversation could explain. "I haven't mentioned any concerns about weight loss." "Haven't you? Perhaps I misunderstood." Nathan continued eating calmly, as if we hadn't just touched on evidence of surveillance that extended beyond what I'd explicitly shared with him. These moments of recognition came regularly, Nathan demonstrating knowledge of appointments, conversations, decisions I hadn't discussed with him. When I confronted him directly, he always had reasonable explanations. but the accumulation of incidents created a pattern that was impossible to ignore. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you've been having trouble sleeping," Nathan said one morning as I appeared in the kitchen later than usual. "Perhaps we should consult with your doctor about safe sleep aids during pregnancy." I never told Mrs. Chen I was having trouble sleeping. "Didn't you? She's very observant about household routines." Nathan handed me a cup of the ginger tea that had become part of my morning ritual. "If you're uncomfortable discussing health concerns with her, perhaps you'd prefer to share them with me directly." The suggestion felt reasonable, but it also highlighted how thoroughly my activities were being monitored and reported. Mrs. Chen wasn't just household staff. She was providing Nathan with detailed information about my daily routines, physical symptoms, emotional state. "I'm not uncomfortable discussing anything," I said carefully. "I just value privacy about medical issues." "Of course, but pregnancy affects more than just the expectant mother. I want to be sure I'm providing appropriate support." Nathan's tone was patient, understanding, but the underlying message was clear. My privacy was less important than his need for information. As my pregnancy progressed and became more visible, Nathan's attention intensified in ways that felt both protective and possessive. He insisted on accompanying me to medical appointments, claiming concern for my safety, but actually participating in discussions with my doctor that felt invasive. "The baby's heartbeat is strong," Dr. Martinez announced during my 20-week ultrasound, moving the wand across my growing belly while Nathan watched the monitor with intense focus. "And the development is completely normal?" Nathan asked, leaning forward to study the grainy images on the screen. "Everything looks perfect. Baby's measuring right on schedule, all organs developing appropriately." Dr. Martinez paused the ultrasound to point out various features. "Would you like to know the sex?" I glanced at Nathan, unsure whether this was a decision we should make together, or one I should make independently. The uncertainty highlighted how unclear our relationship boundaries remained, despite weeks of cohabitation. "What would you prefer?" Nathan asked, deferring to my choice but clearly hoping to be included in the decision. "I'd like to know," I said, suddenly eager for any concrete information about the child we were both planning our lives around. "It's a girl," Dr. Martinez announced with a smile. "A healthy baby girl." Nathan's expression transformed with something that looked like wonder mixed with fierce protectiveness. "A daughter," he said quietly, as if testing how the word felt. Walking home from the appointment, Nathan was unusually quiet, his mind apparently absorbed by the reality of impending fatherhood to a daughter, rather than the abstract concept of parenthood. "I want her to have every opportunity," he said finally as we approached the townhouse. "The best education, the safest environment, protection from anything that might harm her." "She'll have opportunities," I replied. "Children don't need perfection to thrive." "Don't they?" Nathan stopped walking, fixing me with that familiar, intense stare. "Natalie, our daughter will inherit my name, my resources, my connections. She'll also inherit my enemies, my complications, my responsibilities. She needs more than adequate protection. She needs absolute security." The comment revealed more about Nathan's world than he'd previously shared. I'd known he was wealthy and successful, but the reference to enemies suggested complexities beyond normal business competition. "What kind of enemies?" I asked. Nathan resumed walking, his pace suggesting discomfort with the direction of our conversation. "Business rivals, people who resent success, individuals who might see advantage in threatening what I value most. And what you value most is our daughter. What I value most is my family." Nathan's tone carried finality that discouraged further questions, which is why security measures are necessary. That evening, I discovered what Nathan meant by security measures. The townhouse's renovation had included installation of sophisticated surveillance systems, reinforced windows and doors, and communication equipment that seemed excessive for residential use. The monitoring system covers all public areas of the house. Nathan explained when I questioned the cameras I'd noticed in hallways and common rooms. Not bedrooms or bathrooms, obviously. Just security precautions. Security against what? Against anyone who might threaten our family's safety. Nathan's expression was serious, almost grim. Natalie, successful people attract attention from individuals with questionable intentions. These systems ensure that attention doesn't become action. I wanted to ask more questions about what kinds of threats required such elaborate precautions, but Nathan's demeanor suggested the conversation was closed. Instead, I focused on the immediate implications of living in a house where my movements were constantly monitored, even if bedrooms remained private. The sense of being watched extended beyond electronic surveillance. Nathan's business associates, household staff, and various professionals working on the building's completion all seemed to report to him about my activities, health, and general well-being. Mr. Cross mentioned you've been spending a lot of time reading in the garden, the townhouse's landscape designer mentioned during a consultation about plant selections. He wanted to ensure we included seating areas that are comfortable for expectant mothers. Mr. Cross has been asking about your energy levels, Mrs. Chen commented while preparing lunch. He's concerned you might be overexerting yourself with the renovation consultations. Each comment seemed innocent individually, but collectively they painted a picture of comprehensive monitoring that felt invasive, despite being framed as consideration for my welfare. The most unsettling realization came during my 24th week of pregnancy, when I discovered that Nathan had been documenting our cohabitation in ways that extended beyond casual record-keeping. Legal documents, financial arrangements, medical records, and even photographs of me around the house suggested preparation for formal custody proceedings. "What is this?" I asked, confronting him with a folder I'd found in his study while looking for pregnancy books he'd mentioned having. Nathan examined the documents without apparent concern about my discovery. Preparation for formal custody arrangements. Documentation that demonstrates our daughter's living environment, care standards, and parental involvement. You're building a custody case against me? I'm building a custody case that protects our daughter's interests, regardless of how our personal relationship develops. Nathan's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing business contracts rather than plans that could separate me from my child. These documents demonstrate that she's receiving appropriate care in a stable, secure environment. What if I want to leave? Then these documents demonstrate that her continued care is best served by remaining in the environment we've established together. Nathan moved closer, his expression serious, but not unkind. Natalie, I'm not planning to take our daughter from you. I'm planning to ensure she has every advantage, every protection, every opportunity to thrive. By threatening me with custody battles? By demonstrating that her welfare is best served by the partnership we're building together. Nathan's hand moved to rest gently on my shoulder, a gesture that was both comforting and possessive. I want you to choose to stay, to build this family together. But if you choose to leave, our daughter's interests come first. I stared at him, recognizing that the comfortable cage he'd built around me was more secure than I'd realized. Nathan had created conditions where leaving would mean abandoning not just financial security, but potentially my child as well. You've thought of everything, I said quietly. I try to. Nathan's smile was gentle but unmistakably triumphant. Natalie, I want what's best for all of us. Our daughter deserves parents who can provide for her completely, emotionally, financially, and in terms of security. Together, we can give her everything. Apart, we can only give her fragments. That night, lying in the guest bedroom that had become more comfortable than any place I'd ever lived, I understood that Nathan Cross had achieved exactly what he'd planned from the beginning. I was dependent on his support, invested in the home he'd created, committed to arrangements that served his interests more than mine. But our daughter was healthy, protected, and positioned for a future filled with advantages I could never provide alone. And perhaps in a world where my choices had been systematically limited, that was enough to justify the price I was paying for security. The first real threat to our carefully constructed domestic arrangement came during my 32nd week of pregnancy, when I was too visibly pregnant to hide my condition, but still mobile enough to maintain some independence. I was walking home from a prenatal appointment when a black sedan began following me, matching my pace for several blocks before pulling alongside at a red light. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a man I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, expensive suit, cold eyes that studied me with calculating interest. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "My employer would like to speak with you." "I think you have me confused with someone else," I replied, stepping back from the curb despite the public setting, providing some measure of safety. "Nathan Cross's girlfriend, the mother of his child." The man's smile was unpleasant, predatory. "Yes, we know exactly who you are." The light changed, but the sedan didn't move. Other cars began honking, creating a scene that made my skin crawl with visibility and vulnerability. "Mr. Cross has created complications for certain business relationships," the man continued. "Perhaps you could encourage him to be more cooperative." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my voice shook despite my attempt to maintain composure. "Of course you don't, but you could learn, quickly." The man leaned closer to the window, his proximity making my fight-or-flight instincts scream warnings. "Children are precious things, Miss Brooks. It would be unfortunate if anything threatened their safety." The sedan pulled away before I could respond, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with my heart pounding and my hands instinctively protective over my swollen belly. The threat had been delivered politely, almost conversationally, but its implications were terrifyingly clear. I called Nathan from the street, my fingers trembling as I dialed his number. "Someone just threatened me," I said when he answered. "A man in a black car. He knew who I was, knew about the baby." "Where are you?" Nathan's voice sharpened immediately, all casual warmth replaced by something harder and more focused. "Corner of Lexington and 72nd, walking home from Dr. Martinez's office." "Stay exactly where you are. Don't move, don't talk to anyone else. I'm sending security to bring you home immediately." "Security?" "Just stay put, Natalie. 2 minutes." The call ended before I could ask more questions. Within 90 seconds, a large man in a dark suit appeared beside me, as if materialized from the busy street crowd. "Ms. Brooks, I'm Marcus, Mr. Cross's security coordinator. He asked me to escort you home." Marcus was polite, but clearly capable of handling threats more serious than I'd ever imagined. He guided me to a waiting car with tinted windows, checking our surroundings constantly as we moved. The level of preparation suggested this wasn't the first time Nathan had needed to deploy protective measures. Nathan was waiting in the townhouse foyer when we arrived, his expression grim and his posture radiating controlled tension. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, leading me to the living room where Mrs. Chen immediately appeared with tea and the kind of solicitous attention reserved for crisis situations. I recounted the encounter as precisely as possible, watching Nathan's expression grow progressively darker as I described the man's knowledge of our situation and his implicit threats. "Did he touch you? Make any physical contact?" "No, but he knew things, Nathan. About us, about the baby, about where I'd be walking. Of course he did." Nathan moved to the window that overlooked the street, his attention focused on potential threats I couldn't identify. "They've been watching us for weeks, looking for vulnerabilities." "They? Who are they?" Nathan turned from the window, his expression serious enough to make my stomach clench with anxiety that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. "Business competitors who aren't content with legal methods of competition," he said carefully. "People who believe threatening families is acceptable business practice. What kind of business requires that level of security? The kind that generates enough profit to make rivals desperate." Nathan approached slowly, his movement cautious as if I might flee from whatever he was about to reveal. "Natalie, I need you to understand that your safety and our daughter's safety now depend on security measures that might seem excessive." "What aren't you telling me?" Nathan sat across from me, his posture suggesting he was choosing his words carefully. "My business interests extend beyond conventional real estate development. Some of my activities exist in areas where legal and illegal boundaries aren't clearly defined." The admission landed like a physical blow. Nathan wasn't just wealthy and powerful. He was involved in activities that attracted the kind of enemies who made threats against pregnant women. Illegal activities? Activities that certain government agencies and business rivals prefer to characterize as illegal. Nathan's tone remained calm despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. Import or export businesses, financial services, property management that serves clients with complex privacy needs. You're talking about criminal activities. I'm talking about business activities that operate outside traditional regulatory frameworks. Nathan leaned forward, his expression earnest and somehow still trustworthy, despite the implications of his confession. "Natalie, everything I do is designed to protect and provide for my family. Sometimes that requires operating in areas where conventional business approaches aren't sufficient." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the considerate man who'd spent months ensuring my comfort and safety with someone involved in activities that attracted violent threats. "The man in the car threatened our daughter," I said quietly. "Yes. Which is why security measures are no longer optional." Nathan's voice hardened with something that might have been fury carefully controlled. "Marcus and his team will be providing protection whenever you leave the house. The townhouse security systems will be upgraded. Your activities will need to be coordinated to ensure constant oversight." "Constant oversight?" "Protection, Natalie. Complete, comprehensive protection from people who would use you to manipulate me." Nathan moved closer, his proximity both comforting and overwhelming. "Our daughter will grow up safe, but that safety requires sacrifices from both of us." "What kind of sacrifices?" "Limited mobility, reduced privacy, acceptance of security measures that might feel restrictive but are absolutely necessary." Nathan's hand moved to rest gently over mine, a gesture that was becoming familiar despite my continued uncertainty about our relationship. "I'm asking you to trust me to keep you safe. And if I don't want to live like a prisoner, then you'll be risking our daughter's life along with your own." Nathan's voice carried finality that made argument seem pointless. "Natalie, this isn't negotiable anymore. The threat is real, immediate, and directed specifically at you because of your connection to me." I felt the walls of my beautiful cage closing completely. Nathan had created a situation where my only choices were absolute dependence on his protection or exposure to dangers I couldn't handle alone. "What happens after the baby is born?" I asked. "We continue building the family we've started. We raise our daughter together in safety, with every advantage wealth and protection can provide." Nathan's expression softened slightly. "And maybe, eventually, you'll understand that what we have together is worth the sacrifices required to preserve it." 3 weeks later, I went into early labor during a security lockdown, triggered by another threat Nathan's team had intercepted. Our daughter was born in the townhouse's master bedroom. Delivered by a private medical team Nathan had arranged for exactly this contingency. As I held our tiny, perfect daughter for the first time, Nathan beside me with tears in his eyes, and Marcus stationed outside our door, I realized that my choices had led me to exactly where Nathan had planned from the beginning. "She's beautiful," Nathan whispered, his finger touching our daughter's tiny hand. "She's going to have everything, Natalie. Everything we can give her." I looked around the luxurious room where I delivered my child, surrounded by Nathan's security, protected by his resources, completely dependent on his arrangements. Our daughter would grow up safe, privileged, and loved. She would also grow up in a world where protection required constant vigilance and love came with conditions I was still learning to navigate. "What do we name her?" Nathan asked. "Hope," I said, looking down at the tiny face that had changed everything. "Her name is Hope." Nathan smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. Hope Cross. Perfect. As I held our daughter and accepted Nathan's claim on both our futures, I understood that some prisons were built from love, protection, and security, rather than bars and walls. Nathan Cross had gotten everything he'd wanted: a family, a legacy, a woman who would stay because leaving had become impossible. And perhaps, as I watched him cradle our daughter with tender devotion, that was enough. Perhaps love could grow in the spaces between protection and possession, between security and freedom. Perhaps hope would bridge the gap between what I'd lost and what I'd gained by choosing survival over independence. The story would continue. Our story, our family, our complex arrangement that served everyone's needs, if not everyone's desires. But in this moment, holding our daughter while Nathan planned our protected future, I chose to focus on what we'd built together, rather than what I'd sacrificed to make it possible. Hope deserved parents who could give her everything. And together, despite all our complications, we could.